Hello, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the invitation. And I must say, I'm flattered to be here in this such a beautiful place, actually, but following this amazing panel, which shows that what we are seeing, what we are saying in our letters and so on, people are reading and listening, so which is great. That's exactly what we wanted to do. So that's really encouraging. Well, as you know, hosting COP30 in 2025 in the context that we are is not an easy task, right? It's not an easy task if you think about the geopolitical context, but it's not an easy task also because COPs should not be doing what they have been doing in the past 30 years or so. You already heard from that. The climate agenda has come out of COPs in different ways. It's mainstreamed in economics, in the financial system, everywhere, but it's also in our doors, right? So we are seeing the impacts already. For those of us that have been following this for the past 10 years or so, we always, the main argument for climate action has always been the future generations, the intergenerational equity and responsibility. But climate change and climate action is not a future issue anymore. It's a very present one. So how can we reshape this system? How can we make the best use of this instrument, which are the climate conferences, to actually speed up climate action on the ground, to actually improve the quality of climate action if we want to also reduce inequalities and actually mainstream climate in social policies, in economic policies, in labor markets, and so on. So part of what we are trying to do at COP30 this year is actually to really recalibrate, not just at COP30, but for future COPs, what do we mean by a COP? What is a deliverable? How can we look at the outcome of a COP that goes beyond the negotiations outcome? We all know here that the time of regulating the Paris Agreement, of putting the framework and setting the framework, it's done. We have different elements that we are still pending, but it's not about innovating necessarily at the global level. It's about implementation. So to do implementation, we need to talk with different stakeholders. We need to have different instruments. We need to even our narratives, our communication needs to change. So when we mean about organizing COP30 around the 4 pillars, the so-called 4 pillars that we are using, we need to take the best out of those. What are the 4 pillars? And I think we are talking about that, but I think it's always useful to remind and think, what do we mean and what is the role of each of you, each of us in each of those? So we have the leader segment starting at every COP. This is the moment where we have the strongest political signal coming to the COP, that it's actually resonating in the negotiators' mindsets and the way they deal with time, the way they deal with the negotiations, and the way the world perceives the seriousness of our commitment to climate action. We need to take the best out of that this year. It's very challenging once we have 23, the last time I saw NDC submitted. And thanks for those who reminded us. Diana and I have talked about that before, but it's really important that the EU and other developed countries come in submitting their NDCs as much as possible, the sooner as possible. Because this is also a signal of how much of the Paris infrastructure we are willing to embrace and we are willing to protect, right? So we do need that, but we do need those political signals. The second pillar is the negotiations themselves, the UNFCCC negotiations. On that front, we do have a couple of very important elements, but they are not necessarily innovating in the framework. We have the GGA, the Global Goal on Adaptation. That is very critical. It's critical to advance on the ground at the subnational level, on the research field, on data infrastructure. We need those indicators, but we need a larger infrastructure on adaptation framework coming out of this COP. We do have the Just Transition Work Program, which is actually designed to help explaining or exchanging experiences on what does it mean to implement just transitions. But at the moment, we still don't have clarity on how can we implement paragraph 28 in a just, orderly, and equitable manner. We do have that, but we do need the just transition discussions, technologies, experiences, methodologies to come out of that. And we also have the roadmap, as you know, which was something that came out of Baku in a moment where it was a very challenging circumstance to keep trusting the system, but that now it's going to bring a bit of light to what does it mean, what we need to mobilize finance, but it's not going to solve all the problems, because COPs are not silver bullets, and texts at COPs neither. So we do have some deliverables, but is this what's going to bring the energy of the action on the ground, the implementation? No, it's not. So we have the action agenda, our third pillar of COP30 and every COP, actually. And on that, we are seeing, as we heard here before, a lot of things going on. So even if science is telling us that it's not enough, at the same time, if we look around, look at this city these days. I mean, who had ever imagined 10 years ago that London Climate Action Week would be as busy as it is now? This is a symptom of the action happening. This is an evidence that there's a lot of experience going on. It's, of course, maybe it's not enough, but it's something, it's happening. And we need to streamline and focus on what will take us closer to 1.5. What do we need? We need to implement what came out of the GST. That's the principle, the idea of our action agenda. We have already committed back in Dubai at COP28 with a series of actions. So we do have the process of the NDCs and the NAPs that are country-driven, but we have a global commitment to deliver the GST. And from now until the next round of the GST in 2028, we need to make sure that whoever is engaging in this process and whoever wants to come in, the states, the municipalities, the indigenous communities, that they know what the GST is, that they understand what it means, and that they embrace or have ownership of what we need to get to that. The last, but not least pillar is the mobilization. So Brazil has a long history of social participation, a strong civil society ecosystem, and we want to make sure that all voices are heard. Because if anything else, we know that political processes can harm climate or they can protect the climate action. If people understand what that means, if they feel part of it, if it's not just an electoral promise, but it's actually something that comes from the bottom up. So we need to mobilize people to understand that COPs are not the only, being at a COP physically during those 2 weeks of the UN conference is not the only way to be part of the solution. You can participate on a COP, as Nancy was saying here, we all can do something about climate that is Paris coherent in our own daily decisions. But we need to be conscious about that, and we need to understand that inaction is not neutral. It's an ethical imperative. And this is something I will close by saying that we are trying to innovate in several fronts because we know that we can make mistakes trying something different. We cannot make the same mistakes committing the same on the past. So we are bringing the global ethical stocktake, which actually took place yesterday at the Kew Gardens here with Mary Robinson and several wonderful European voices coming in to bring the ethics and the moral discussions to the COP. We are going to do around the world an exercise like that to bring these values, behavior, discussions, a deeper discussion on what do we need to do. We are bringing the information integrity initiative to the COP, which is something that it's not a side conversation. It's at the core of what we need to do, also to strengthen science communication and so on. So clearly, climate is not confined to the COP process, and it's not confined to the climate community, which for those who are in the climate bubble sometimes can sound like something discomfortable. But that's where we need to be. We need to be mainstreaming in every single development conversation we have on mitigation, on adaptation, on building capacity, on thinking about technology, on taking financial decisions. We can, there's a lot going on, but we need you all to join the Mutirão. Thank you so much.